Ele é PhD em Economia pela Universidade de Colômbia, é professor da Universidade de Loyola em New Orleans, é escritor, editor, co-editor de muitos livros, entre eles o Big Hit, que é o Defendendo o Indefensável, o nome em português. Escreveu mais de 500 artigos acadêmicos, contribuiu para diversas publicações, muitas delas voltadas justamente para a escola austríaca. Vou chamar ao palco o Walter Block.
Can I be heard now? Thanks for the kind introduction. I assume it was a kind introduction. I didn't understand a word of it, but I'm giving a lecture tomorrow on Austrian economics. Today it'll be on libertarian theory, but on Monday I'm also giving a lecture at USP, University of Sao Paulo, at 1 o'clock. Originally it was supposed to be a debate between me and either a Marxist or a Keynesian professor, but they were too busy. They had more important things to do than to debate an Austrian libertarian. What is libertarianism? Libertarianism is a theory of when is violence justified. And it has one answer, very simple answer, only in response to or to prevent other people from using violence. And that's all libertarianism is, and the rest is implications of libertarianism. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that, because suppose that I grabbed that camera that cameraman just shot at me. Did I commit violence against him? And we get into a fight, I'm trying to grab the camera, he's trying to hold on to it. In order to determine whether I'm initiating violence and he's defensive, or he's initiating violence by resisting my grabbing the camera, we have to have a theory of property rights, namely who owns the camera. If he stole it from me yesterday and I bought it and I had it for years, well then he, in resisting me, is creating violence, violating the libertarian axiom. On the other hand, if, as is true, it's his and I try to grab it, then I'm the bad guy. But so libertarianism is like two sides of the same coin. On the one side is the non-aggression principle, but on the other side, equally important, is property rights. Because without property rights, we don't know who's initiating violence. It might be defensive. So how do you determine property rights? Well, the Lockean, Rothbardian view is for virgin territory. Whoever homesteads it first, whoever mixes his labor with the land, gets to own the land, or the cow, or whatever it is. Another way of determining it is through trade. There are licit, legitimate ways of title transfer to property. One of them would be trade. So for example, if I mix my labor with land and I grow corn, and you domesticate a cow and you get milk, you own the milk and I own the corn. But now we trade. And now I get to own the corn even though I didn't produce it, and you get to own, no, I mixed that up. You get to own the corn even though you didn't produce it, and I get to own the milk even though I didn't produce it, but we can each trace it back to homesteading and voluntary trade. Another legitimate title transfer is gifts. I give you some corn, you give me some milk. Or we have a bet. We have a bet as to who's going to win the non-existent debate between me and the Marxist as to the one that isn't occurring on Monday. And whoever loses gets the title to whatever the property is. One of my perversities or my interest is to intermingle, so I'm going to have some comments to make about previous speakers. I don't think the other previous speakers did comment on each other. I'm going to have some comments on what Jeff Tucker said. Before I get to that, let me ask, to talk about some of the subject of the previous speaker, Professor Moreira, what is the libertarian view on individualism versus collectivism? Are we individualists? I say no. As long as it's voluntary collectivism, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with a kibbutz or a voluntary collective or a hippie commune or anything like that. If you really take this idea that libertarians are individualists, not collectivists, then we have to favor individual sports like tennis, and we have to oppose collective sports like soccer, which is crazy. I mean, libertarians don't have to oppose soccer because it's a collective game. Are we left or right? Are libertarians left or right? I say neither. We're as far apart from the left as we are from the right. On economics, the right is maybe a little bit better on economic liberty than the left. On personal liberties, the left is maybe a little bit better than the right. On personal liberties, the right to do pornography or prostitution or drugs, which doesn't mean that libertarians favor these things. It just means that we want to legalize them, which is an important distinction to keep in mind. And on foreign policy, they're both very bad, at least in the United States. Each one is more of a warmonger than the other. Each one wants to take over other countries. Somebody once said that to be a right-winger, you have to favor the right to life and then to kill as many foreigners as possible, which is just a little crazy. What about the intellectual property? Do libertarians favor that? Yes. Libertarians rather oppose intellectual property because of the points that Jeff Tucker made very eloquently about scarcity. You can only own scarce goods, and if it's not scarce, you can't own it. The reason for that is if it's a scarce good, then we could have a conflict over who owns it, like that camera that I was talking about before. But if it's a non-scarce good where everyone can have it, well, then it's silly to have a conflict over it. We can all have it. But the other question is, will intellectual property promote innovation? And here I tend to disagree with Jeff Tucker. I think that it's an empirical issue. We don't know. It's not sure. Maybe in some cases it will, and maybe in other cases it won't. And he was very eloquent on the negative side, and I think that that's very important. But it's possible, it's conceivable, it's an empirical issue as to whether we'll have more innovation or not. I heard there was an author who wrote a book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to History of Brazil, and he wrote this book, and other people are using the book and reprinting it without his permission. Well, possibly he'll make more money that way because the demand for his services as a public speaker will increase because many more people are publishing it, or not. I don't know. It's an empirical issue, and I don't think we can be as definitive as Jeff Tucker was. There is such a thing called the performative contradiction. Hans Hoppe has done a lot of work on this. A performative contradiction is you say something and your saying of it is contradicted by your saying it. So for example, if I said, I'm asleep, well, that's a contradiction because I'm not asleep. If I were asleep, I couldn't be giving a lecture. Or I'm dead. I don't mean I'm dead tired, I mean I'm dead. Well, dead people can't speak, so that's a performative contradiction. Well, now take the statement, I favor intellectual property rights. How many words is that? I favor intellectual property rights. That's 5 words. Well, if you really favor intellectual property rights, you have no right to use those words because those words were created by someone else and you haven't paid them. I was created by Mr. I. How dare you use the word I without paying Mr. I? Favor? Mr. Favor created that one. Intellectual, Mr. Intellectual. So you're committing a performative contradiction if you articulate this view, which sort of should count against the view, because if you can't say it without logically contradicting yourself, you're in trouble. So if you really hold this view, shut up. Don't speak. Because if you speak, you're violating your supposed principles. Now, tomorrow I'm going to be speaking about Austrian economics, and I want to distinguish libertarianism not only from individualism and collectivism, but also from Austrian economics. And here is another problem I had with some of what Jeff Tucker said. Maybe it was a slip of the tongue. I think it was a slip of the tongue. But he said that the Austrians oppose intellectual property rights. Libertarians, yes, but not Austrians. Austrian is a branch of economics. All branches of economics, all schools of economics are it's a positive view. It's not a normative view. Economics is a science. It's a science of trying to understand economic reality, to explain why things happen, to explain that if you do this, then this will occur. But you can't favor or oppose anything qua Austrian, because Austrianism is value-free, or Wertfreiheit in German. My German pronunciation isn't all that good, but that's what Mises and Rothbard meant. So, for example, we can say as Austrian economists that rent control will ruin housing or lower the quality of housing compared to what it otherwise would have been. We can say the minimum wage will create vast unemployment for unskilled workers. And we can say that intellectual property has got certain negative connotations. But we can't say whether we favor it or oppose it, because qua economist, we're precluded from that. We can only say what the effects are. For example, I might favor the minimum wage law as an Austrian. As an Austrian, I know it creates unemployment of unskilled workers. But I might favor unemployment of unskilled workers. Maybe I hate unskilled workers and I want them to be unemployed. I mean, it's a position, right? So I'm trying to distinguish between Austrian economics, which is a positive science, and libertarianism, which is an ethical theory, a very narrow part of ethics. Not whether it's good or bad to smoke or to drink this or that, but what is the proper use of violence. Okay, what I'm now going to do, that I've introduced libertarianism and distinguished it from other intellectual things, is I'm going to apply it to unionism and discrimination. That's what the title of my talk is. But I've added a few things too. I'm going to add in capitalism and abortion, because those are challenges. Well, abortion is a more of an intellectual challenge for libertarianism. But I want to talk a little bit about capitalism, and I want to distinguish between crony capitalism, or fascism, and laissez-faire capitalism, which I, as a libertarian, favor. Laissez-faire capitalism is either government does very, very little or nothing at all, and all of the armies, courts, and police functions are taken over by private enterprise, or if you have the minimal state government view, that's the limit of government. Government does nothing else but that. Now you have to distinguish that, which I think is a wonderful system. It's creative, it's productive, it'll end poverty, it'll promote wealth and human happiness and human welfare, from this other thing called crony capitalism, which people don't distinguish. A lot of people in South America and Latin America and all over the world think that if you favor capitalism, you favor imperialism. You favor the US government or Great Britain in the last century taking over other countries. Not so. You don't favor bailouts. What you support is if a company succeeds by making a lower price and a better offer and more quality and more reliability, then it succeeds, and if not, it fails, and people have to go and do other things. And that's why we have pretty good ties and pretty good wristwatches and pretty good jackets, because they are done privately. If a tie or a wristwatch or a jacket was done badly in laissez-faire, and to an extent we do have that, well then they go broke, or they lose money and maybe go broke, and then other people take over, and that's why these things are pretty good. Whereas in other areas, the government does it, like the post office, for example. And I don't know what it's like here, but in the northern hemisphere, the post office is very bad, but they can't go broke. I'm from New Orleans. We had this Katrina storm in 2005, and it killed, well, I was going to say it killed, but it didn't kill anyone. Rather, the FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers killed 1,900 people there, and they didn't go broke. Now, it's a tragedy when people die, but for the economist in me, it's really a vicious thing that you don't have this turnover. You don't have rewards for success and penalties for failure. If you did, you would have more economic efficiency. Some people, like the Occupy people, and perhaps many Marxists, don't make that distinction. They don't see the difference between McDonald's or Walmart earning, or Microsoft earning lots of money by helping people, by making them products, and other places by make money through the government. For example, Detroit, those automobile manufacturing companies, the unions, which I'll get to in a minute, were so powerful that the salaries for people working on the assembly line was $75 an hour, which I think is 150 reals an hour, something like that, 2 to 1, which is a very, very high salary, and they were able to get that by coercion, which I'll mention later, and then they had to be bailed out by Washington, D.C., by Obama. And now Obama is bragging, well, we saved the Detroit industry. Yes, surely they saved it, but Henry Hazlitt, in his magnificent book, Economics in One Lesson, which was one of the books that converted me to libertarianism, said, you have to look at the unseen. I got this from Bastiat, a French economist. Yes, Detroit was saved, but at the cost of what? All the other things that could have been created but weren't, because all the money went to Detroit. Some people oppose capitalism because they think we shouldn't be making money off of human misery. Well, what's wrong with making money off of human misery if the result of it is reducing human misery? I bought a pair of shoes. There they are, a pair of shoes. Bought it for $100, let's say. My misery was reduced. I valued the shoes at more than 100, otherwise I wouldn't have bought them, and therefore I made a profit off the seller. He valued the shoes at less than 100. He had a whole bunch in a shoe store. Let's say he valued them at 70. He made $30 profit off of me. So one way to say it is we each exploited the other. But that's silly. We didn't exploit each other. We helped each other. I had shoes that I valued more than he, and he valued the money more than the shoes, and we gained from mutual trade. So this idea that you make money off of human misery, and that's why they don't have markets in body parts. We have a lot of people going to the grave because they are lacking a kidney or a heart or a spleen or something like that. And there are other people whose body parts, you know what they call motorcycles, donor mobiles, because young people ride them, and when they get killed, those body parts are good, whereas mine are sort of old and fat. You know, you don't need my body parts, but their body parts are very important. But you have needless deaths because somehow these critics of the market, the socialists, say, well, you can't make money off of human misery. Well, you should be able to make money off of human misery because that's the way to reduce human misery. Another way to put it is you can't make money off of helping people. Well, why not? You know, some people say, well, it's okay to donate an organ to someone else, but if you charge for it, it's no good. I don't understand why. I mean, if giving it is legitimate, why is charging for it illegitimate? If having sex is legitimate between consenting adults, why would it not be legitimate to pay for it, as in prostitution? As a libertarian, it's hard for me to understand that. Okay, I now want to apply libertarianism to unionism. That's the first thing on my dance card here. And my analysis of unions is that it's complicated. It's not clear that we libertarians have to oppose unions. It depends upon what they do. And unions do two things, not just one. It's a complex thing. They do two things, one of which is entirely legitimate, and the other is illegitimate. So suppose somebody comes into his boss, and there must be 300 or 400 people in this audience, so make believe I'm the boss and you're all my workers, and I'm paying you all $10 an hour, and one of you comes in and says, if you don't give me $11 an hour, I'm quitting. My attitude is more likely, okay, well, goodbye. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. But do you have a right to do that? Of course you have a right to do that. You have a right to quit. If you don't have a right to quit, you're a slave. I mean, the only problem with slavery was you couldn't quit. I mean, otherwise slavery wasn't so bad. You know, you could pick cotton, and they give you gruel, and they give you a little house, and you could sing songs. It's not so bad. The only problem is you couldn't quit. If you could quit, slavery wouldn't be so bad. Masochists might like to become slaves. Who knows? By the way, I also favor voluntary slavery. Somebody attacked voluntary slavery, so I have to mention voluntary slavery. My child, my son, let's say, has this horrible disease, and it'll cost $5 million to fix him up, and I don't have the money. You are a very rich capitalist pig, oink oink, and you've long wanted someone like me to be your slave, so you give me $5 million, and I give it to my son's doctors, and you benefit because you value my services more than the $5 million, and I benefit because I value his life more than my freedom. Voluntary slavery is okay. It's coercive slavery that's no good. Okay, getting back to unions. So one of you comes in, asks for a wage raise, and I say, forget it, you're fired. But now the same one of you comes and says, I represent all 500 people in this room, and if you don't give us the wage rate, we're all going to quit at the same time. Now I have to say to myself, well, you know, to replace all of you, and I've got orders to fill, it's going to be a pain in the neck. And you're well coordinated, you know, people work together, it's been an ongoing operation. I might say, okay, you know, maybe how about instead of 11, I'll give you 10.50, or I'm more likely to bargain. So if that's all the union did was threaten a mass quit, and by the way, if you have a right to do something, you have a right to threaten to do it, usually. So if you have a right to quit, you have a right to threaten to quit, and if an individual has a right to quit and to threaten to quit, well then so does the whole group. In the early days of antitrust in the US, this was seen as a restraint of trade, and they used antitrust against unions. Well, that was improper. Okay, so if unions just limited themselves to that, libertarians would say, okay, well, it's legitimate, it's not violating the non-aggression axiom. But unions do one more thing. First they quit, and then they circle the factory, and they have a picket, and they won't allow me to hire other workers, replacement workers. They call them scabs, S-C-A-B, scabs, and it ought to be hate speech. Nowadays we're against hate speech. If you call blacks or gays or Jews bad words, you can go to jail. I don't know why you can't go to jail for calling people scabs, but I guess the thing operates differently with groups that the left wing hates. That's okay to denigrate them. Let me give you an analogy. It's a shame if a husband divorces his wife. You know, you try to get married forever, but sometimes it happens. And if it happens, it happens. And divorce is compatible with libertarianism, again, because otherwise, if you can't leave, you're a slave. But suppose the husband gets all his friends and surrounds his ex-wife's house, and any other man who wants to date his ex-wife, he beats him up. Well, this is not kosher. This is illegitimate because you're using violence against innocent people, and that's what unions do. They surround the place, and they won't allow raw materials to come in or finished products to go out or to hire scabs or replacement workers. Well, that's totally unacceptable to libertarianism. So are there any legitimate unions? I was doing some research on this. I was in Canada at the time, and I came across this group, CLAC, Christian Labor Association of Canada. And I said, well, would you beat up scabs? Oh, no, we're Christians, turn the other cheek, you know, this, that, and the other, fine. I thought I had a live one. And then I said, well, what do you think about labor legislation that forces the employer to deal with you whether you like to or not? And he said, oh, we favor labor legislation. See, labor legislation that forces the husband to deal with his wife when he wants to divorce her, or the employer to deal with you rotten kids who are striking, that's a violation of rights too. We have a right to exit. Freedom of association is very important. And if you don't have freedom of association, that's again akin to coercive slavery. Let me talk a little bit about the economics of unionism. Again, this is very different than the libertarian analysis. Before I was talking about the ethical analysis of unions. Now I'm talking about the economic effects of unions, which is a very different kind of a thing. Well, we economists, and not just Austrians, but even the mainstream, maybe not the Marxists, but the mainstream neoclassical economists agree that what determines wages is not employer generosity, but productivity of workers. Marginal revenue productivity, discounted marginal revenue productivity, these are complications, but the bottom line is productivity. So suppose I have a productivity of $10 an hour. That means if you hire me, instead of making $1,000 an hour from your factory, you'll make $1,010 an hour, and you attribute the extra $10 to me working for you. So my productivity is $10 an hour. And you're a bunch of capitalist pigs. What is your opening bid? What would you like to pay me? 0 is a good, minus infinity. You want me to pay you an infinite amount of money for the privilege of working for you? But suppose it starts out with a penny. You offer a penny, 1 cent, 1/100th of a dollar. You offer me a penny. Well, if my productivity is $10 an hour, and you pay me a penny, you make a profit of $9.99. Now, you're all a bunch of employers, and one of you now hires me for a penny, and the rest of you applaud because you're exploiting labor, and that's what capitalists want to do, exploit workers. But some other worker is going to say, what? 2 cents. Because while he applauds exploiting workers in the abstract, he'd rather do the exploiting. And right now the other guy has got me for a penny. So he's going to say 2 cents. He'll only make $9.98, but better him make $9.98 than the other guy making $9.99. Well, then somebody else would say 3 cents, 4 cents, 5 cents, a quarter, $1. Where will this bidding end? In equilibrium at $10 an hour, because in equilibrium there are no profits. So wages can't stay under productivity. Can wages be above productivity? Suppose I say, hire me for $25 an hour, and I'm worth $10 an hour. What's going to happen to you if you hire me for $25 an hour and I'm worth $10? You lose $15 an hour? Yes? You're not going to long endure paying your workers more. You can't pay them less because the market bidding process will bid them up. So wages tend to equal productivity. So now you ask, well, what is the effect of unions on wages? You have to ask, what is the effect of unions on productivity? Do unions increase productivity or not? And obviously they don't. They fight, they go on strike, they beat up scabs, they have intra-union fighting over, which union shall represent the workers. They're just a waste of time. So as an economic issue, as opposed to a libertarian issue, unions don't really raise wages except by use of violence. If they can succeed in having labor legislation or succeed in beating up scabs, then they can. That's why the workers in Detroit manufacturing of automobiles was making $75 an hour. So you might say, well, unions do raise wages, but so do criminal gangs. They make money. That doesn't mean that they're legitimate, just because they make money for their people. Unions are a tapeworm or a parasite. I start a company, I employ all you people, we have vast success, and if the union is powerful enough, you suck up all the profits. Whereas in the free society, if I'm making a lot of profits, I can expand and make more of the stuff that the people want that we're making. There are some cases where unionists make money that is horrendous. For example, in the Mississippi River near New Orleans, where I live, the tugboat captains make $500,000 a year, which is very, very high. Why? Because they have a very powerful union. In New York City, in the music places where the people who arrange the chairs, they make $250,000 a year just for putting the chairs out, because they have a very powerful union. I used to teach at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Mass., and that was part of the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt in the US means heavy union places what they did in Worcester, Mass. is they took steel and made ball bearings and hammers and pliers and things like that. And the unions just raised the wages so high that the companies went down south to South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, places like that, to escape the unions. And Ted Kennedy, or the leftist Democrats in the US, didn't much like that. Okay, that is my analysis of unions on the basis of a complex thing, because unions do two things. And when I was writing my notes for this, I realized that there was another challenge to libertarianism where it's a complex sort of a thing, and it fits in right with this, and that's abortion. So I now ask, what is the libertarian view on abortion? And my claim is that abortion also is a complex phenomenon, and therefore requires very careful determination. Now I'm going to start with the notion that a fertilized egg is a human being. I do so for two reasons. One, I think it's true. I think that once you have the egg, the sperm inside the egg, if you keep it in the right environment, it'll grow into a human being. So it's a human being. And secondly, I do it because I don't want to have a straw man argument, and that'll become more clear as I progress. So there are two theories. One is the pro-life theory. Pro-life theory is a human being, you can't have an abortion. Then the pro-choice theory is it's not a human being, and the mother has a right to abort. And the reason I say it's a complicated thing is because abortion consists not of one thing, but of two things. One, killing. Two, evicting. Evicting. Getting rid of the fetus, but not killing it, because the two are not the same. There are cases where a woman is in the 8th month of her pregnancy, and the fetus is perfectly viable outside of the womb. Ron Paul talks about this, and the fetus comes out and it's crying, and it's a baby, and they either kill it or they let it die, and they don't allow other people to come in and take the baby, even though they would be happy to do so. The eviction theory is a true compromise between the pro-life and the pro-choice, and I think it's the only correct libertarian theory of this issue. What I mean by a legitimate compromise is compared with an illegitimate compromise. An illegitimate compromise is you say 2 plus 2 is 4, I say 2 plus 2 is 6, and we compromise. We say 2 plus 2 is 5. That's an illegitimate compromise. You're just dividing the difference in half and splitting the difference. There's no philosophy there. Whereas here there is a philosophy, and the philosophy is you have a right to evict, but not to kill. Suppose I have a lawn, a big house, and you cross the lawn. Do I have a right to shoot you? No. The libertarian theory is that you have to remove the trespasser in the gentlest manner possible. So I tell you, sir, do you realize you're trespassing on my land? Please get off. And if you say, oh, sorry, I didn't realize it, I have no right to shoot him. If he gives me back talk and starts pushing me around, then he's guilty of more than trespass, and I have a right to use much more violent techniques. But the fetus is a trespasser. The unwanted fetus is a trespasser. The unwanted fetus is a trespasser. It's easy to see this in the case of rape. A girl is walking down the street, somebody grabs her, impregnates her, and now she has something growing in her that she doesn't want. If that's not a trespasser, I don't know what is a trespasser. She has a right to evict, but not to kill, because the baby is innocent. The baby didn't violate rights. So you can't kill the fetus, you can only evict it. Now, 100 years ago, the only way to evict was to kill. And since the libertarian believes in property rights more important than the right to life, property rights uber alles, you have a right to evict, even though it means killing, even though it's a human being. But if we adopt this policy right now, we will save roughly 1/3 of human beings, or 1/3 of fetuses, namely all the ones in the last trimester, the 7th, 8th, or 9th month. Because no longer will you, a woman, be able to kill and evict, you'll only be able to evict. Now the feminists and the people who are pro-choice say, well, not only do I have a right to evict, I have a right to kill, because I don't want that man's child to live. Well, they don't have any right to say that they don't want that man's child to live, because that man's child is innocent. All they have a right is to the property rights of their body, and they have a right to evict an unwanted visitor or a trespasser. Now, some people say, well, when you had intercourse, you had an invitation. You invited the fetus in. No. In the case of rape, you didn't invite anyone in. Or there are some people that are unaware of the results of intercourse. Don't ask. Theoretically, there must be some people that don't know, and they engage in intercourse, and they don't know that a baby comes as a result, so they didn't invite anyone in. Other people say, well, you have an implicit contract with the fetus. Now, I'm not against implicit contracts. If you order a cup of coffee, and you drink the cup of coffee, and then they charge you $1 trillion, not a legitimate contract. There was no meeting of the minds. So I'm not against implicit contracts. But for there to be an implicit contract, you have to have at least two parties. And we forget about the husband, except in the case of surrogate mother. If there's a surrogate mother where the mother is paid to have the baby, well, then she can't evict because that would violate her contract. But forget about that. Forget about the husband. Did the mother invite in the fetus? Did the mother rather have a contract with the fetus? No. Because at the time of the fetus, at the time of intercourse, there was no fetus. Now, let me explain sex to you people. The way it works is you have sex. Well, I better stop this. I'm going to get in trouble. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the sperm goes into the vagina, and then it takes an hour or two or three, I'm no biologist, I don't know, to impregnate or to get into the egg. So at the time of intercourse, there's no other person with whom you can have a contract, because the fertilized egg, namely the human being, does not exist yet. There's a time dimension, a time between intercourse and the creation of that life. So it can't be a contract. Another objection to my theory is somebody says, well, come on to my plane. I'm going to take you on a plane or a boat trip. And now I'm out in the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic, or I'm up at 30,000 feet, and I say, oh, you know, it was nice having you as a guest, but now you have to leave. No parachute, no boat or anything, just leave. Well, here there's an implicit contract. So I think that the analogy fails. Now, I realize that this is a very controversial area. I've written a lot about it. If you have questions about this that I can't answer in the question and answer period, please email me, and I will show you the articles I've written and maybe discuss it with you. And that goes for anything else I say. If we don't exhaust all the back and forth, please email me. You just look up Walter Block and you can get my email. Okay, the third thing, or the fourth thing, I'm losing track, is discrimination. What is the libertarian view on discrimination? Now, I don't know what the law is in this country, but in Canada and the US, the countries that I'm familiar with, and also Europe a bit, it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of race, sex, sexual preference, age, religion, beauty. There is such a thing as lookism. You're not allowed to discriminate against ugly people anymore. How about people that are follically deprived? That means bald. Maybe we should have a law there. Murray Rothbard once tried to make a reductio ad absurdum, and he said, well, how about short, fat people? He was short and fat. But you're not allowed. The reductio failed because they now have laws against that too. You pretty much can't discriminate against anyone. There are some limits, but it's okay to discriminate against libertarians and Austrian economists. Thank God we have some liberty here. This is a violation of free association. If you have to hire somebody that you don't want to, for whatever reason, their race, you don't like their race, their color, their creed, their religion, and you are forced to hire them, then you're violating the law of free association. People are not free to interact, to associate with the people that they want to. And also, it's illogical. Take heterosexuals, disgusting, evil heterosexuals. Male heterosexuals refuse to go to bed with half the human race. Isn't that despicable? Female heterosexuals are equally guilty. They too refuse to go to bed with half the human race. Notice I started with heterosexuals because I want to be safe here, because now I'm going to attack homosexuals. Homosexuals are monstrous. They're evil. Male homosexuals refuse to go to bed with half the human race, namely women. Female heterosexuals, lesbians, refuse to go to bed with half the human race, namely men. Aren't they all despicable? The only legitimate relationship is bisexuality. We should have compulsory bisexuality if we're serious about this nonsense. Because only bisexuals have the decency to not preclude, to not be prejudiced against half the human race. But even despicable, disgusting, dirty bisexuals also discriminate. They discriminate on lookism, namely they favor beautiful people than ugly. They discriminate on sense of humor, on race, religion, who knows what they discriminate. And the only thing they don't discriminate on the basis of is male or female, gender. So this is a crazy law. I'm trying to make a reductio ad absurdum. I'm trying to take them seriously. I'm trying to say, look, okay, you don't want to have discrimination? Compulsory bisexuality. I mean, that's the logical implication. And they say, well, you know, we're only talking about commerce, not personal life. But for the libertarian, there's no difference between personal life and commercial life. Look, it's illegal to murder anyone, whether in your home or in your business. It's illegal to rape anyone, whether at home or in business. So it should be equally illegal to discriminate. If it's illegal to discriminate in business, it should be illegal to discriminate at home. Because for the libertarian, there's no such big difference between commerce and personal. It's rights. Then you have other weirdnesses. Sometimes it's okay to discriminate on buyers but not sellers. Okay, I hate all Chinese people, I hate all black people, and I hate all Jews. I'm a self-hating Jew, I'm Jewish, I hate them all. Do I have to go to a Chinese restaurant? No. Do I have to go to a black restaurant? No. Do I have to go to a Jewish restaurant? No. I can go to any restaurant I want, and I won't be violating the law. But if I'm a restaurant owner and I say no blacks, Jews, or Chinese allowed, oh no, that's no good. But why? The law is the law is the law. If it's illegal, if it should be illegal for sellers to discriminate, it should be illegal for buyers to discriminate. And sometimes it is illegal for buyers to discriminate. For example, if Walmart or a big buyer of things says, well, we're not buying from blacks, or we're not buying from Jews, or we're not buying from Martians, they can be sued. So the point is that the law works in mysterious ways, illogical ways. If these people were serious about their crappy law, they would apply it, holus bolus, they would apply it to everything. But they're not. They pick and choose, which shows that it's dead from the neck up. It's an illogical law. Rand Paul, Ron Paul's son, the senator from Kentucky, got into trouble because he said that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the US was illegitimate. Part of it was legitimate because blacks weren't allowed to vote and blacks weren't allowed to use water fountains and other things under Jim Crow laws in the US South. And that part he agreed with. But the other part was that they have a right to go to lunch counters where the lunch counter owner doesn't want them. And he said that was a violation of property rights. Unfortunately, he reneged on this. He was pushed around. But Ron Paul, my man, I love Ron Paul. By the way, I have a new book out. It just came out as I was leaving to come here to Sao Paulo. It's, I forget the title of it, something like Ron Paul Will Win in 2012, or Ron Paul, Great Libertarian. I forget the title they finally chose. It's available, so here's a commercial. Go get that book. It's a wonderful, if I say so myself. What it is my love letter to Ron Paul. I think he is magnificent. I mean, he's converting people to libertarianism wholesale. I mean, he goes to college campuses and he gets 10, 15, 20,000 people all applauding him. He mentions Austrian economics and he gets a standing ovation. When I started in the libertarian movement in 1962, 50 years ago, There was no such thing like that. I mean, this is just amazing. I used to have a full head of hair. I pulled out my hair in such glee because of Ron Paul. Now, I don't, so part of it is my love letter to him. Another part of it is support for him. Like, I'm trying to promote his candidacy during the days when the mainstream was ignoring him. They're still ignoring him. And I would write articles like, well, if Ron Paul wins, who will he pick for vice president? Who will he pick for Supreme Court? What are his views here? And justifying his views there. And another part of it, am I running out of time? No?
Water for you.
Water? No, I'm okay.
Are you okay? Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another part of it is, you see, I don't mind when the lefties criticize Ron. What do you expect? They're lefties. They can't help themselves. I don't mind when the conservatives ignore him. You know, there's this Gandhi thing. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they denigrate you, and then you win. Ron might win. I mean, if he can beat Obama, he's going to not kill, not slaughter, but he's going to really have a landslide against Obama because Obama's losing his own people on the anti-war and the drugs and stuff like that. See, Ron doesn't do too well among Republicans, but he gets a lot of Democrat and independent support. So what I was saying is the third part of my book, in addition to my love letter and my support for him with vice presidents and Supreme Court people, is attacking libertarians who have libertarian credentials, who attack Ron Paul. Wendy McElroy was mentioned before, she's one of them. Randy Barnett. They write articles in the mainstream media attacking Ron Paul, and that really gets me going. It's sort of like the bull with the red flag. So maybe a quarter of the book is attacking libertarians who attack Ron Paul, namely defending him. I think it's almost a litmus test. I mean, you know, these anarchists say, well, we shouldn't vote. Well, they should read Lysander Spooner about no treason where it's legitimate to vote. Look, if you're a slave and they let you vote between the mean overseer and the good overseer, the mean overseer beats you every minute and the good overseer only beats you once a week, and you vote, does that mean you support slavery? No. So the third part, why did I get off on Ron Paul? Oh yeah, I remember. This wasn't on purpose. What I was talking about is Rand Paul. And Rand Paul said that it was illegitimate to have the Civil Rights Act because it violates the property rights. Remember those from the beginning of my lecture, property rights being very important? It violates the property rights of lunchroom counters or restaurants that don't want people in their restaurant. And then, you know, the lefties say, well, if you're open to the public, you have to allow everyone in the public to come to your restaurant. And the answer is, I'm not open to the public. I'm just open to the white public, or to the black public, or to the Jewish public, or, you know, it should be a voluntary interaction. You shouldn't be forced to deal with people that you don't want to deal with. And it's unnecessary because the free enterprise system will save downtrodden minorities. Look, suppose blacks and whites have equal productivity of $10 an hour. And because of racial discrimination, blacks are only paid $7 an hour, and whites are paid $10 an hour. How much money can you earn if you hire a white? Zero. Because he gets you $10 an hour, but you have to pay him $10 an hour, so the difference is zero. How much money can you make if you hire a black person who is the downtrodden? Well, he's producing $10 an hour, you're only paying him $7, and the difference is $3 an hour. So anyone who's not hiring a black person because of racial discrimination is going to lose money. The other people are going to be able to drive them out of business. The market, the free enterprise system, the magic of the market will solve this problem. Suppose I won't allow blacks into my restaurant. Well, some other restaurant owner will allow blacks into there, and he'll be able to charge them more, and he'll make more profits and knock me out of business. There was that other case where black people were not allowed to ride in the back of the bus, or rather were confined to the back of the bus. They were told they could only ride in the back of the bus. My question is, well, why didn't some other bus company open up and say, look, blacks, you can ride wherever you want? The answer was that in order to open up a bus line, you had to get a permit from the very people who were in charge of Jim Crow legislation in the first place. But if there was a market, all of this stuff is impotent to hurt the downtrodden minority. So there's no need for this. I mean, we're libertarians. We root for the underdog. We don't much like that Jews or blacks or Chinese or whoever are downtrodden. But we don't realize that the market has within it the power to overturn these things. Okay, I've done what I was supposed to do, I think. I mentioned what libertarianism is. I applied it to 4 or 5 things. I'm now ready for questions, discussion, dialogue.
I'll have a first one here in English from Paulo Cogos. He says, I fear racism and its consequences is in a libertarian world, but I'm not sure of it. Do you think from an historical perspective that racism is a state idea? Do you think racism would occur in a libertarian society?
I think a lot of isms would occur in a libertarian society. I play chess. Chessism occurs. I like chess people. I don't like people who don't play chess. I open up a business. I say, unless you play chess, you can't come to my restaurant. Do I have a right to do that? Sure. We don't all have to get together and mingle, us chess players and you non-chess players, you despicable non-chess players. Racism, I think, is part of the human condition. We like people like us. Not only in race. I mean, if there were a black libertarian, and there are black libertarians, I would be their friend. I don't have that particular problem, or I don't have that particular taste. Yes, racism is helped by government. But racism and sexism and other discriminatory behaviors, I think, are part of the human condition, and there's nothing wrong with them. If people want to associate with people that are similar to them, why should they not be allowed to do so? It might not be nice, but it's not a violation of libertarian law. Libertarian law says, just keep your goddamn mitts to yourself. Don't invade. Don't grab other people or their property. That's it. You can do anything else you want. Up to and including only marrying someone who plays chess, or never marrying someone who plays chess, or who is Jewish, black, white, has hair, beard, whatever. That's what freedom is. And while Rand Paul reneged on this attack on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Ron Paul did not. Ron Paul stood firm on this libertarian notion that we have a right to do anything we damn well please except to initiate violence. That's what libertarianism is.
Ok, aqui na frente.
Can I contrast my view on voluntary slavery with Rothbard's view on voluntary slavery? Now, I consider myself a Rothbardian. I mean, he was my guru, he was my mentor, but we're not a cult. Libertarian, like the Ayn Rand objectivist cult, if you disagree with Ayn Rand, they boot you out. Libertarians can disagree. I disagree with Murray. I think he's wrong on this one. I've discussed it with him, and what he says is, well, you can't sell the will. Now, you bought me as a slave owner. Remember, you paid that $5 million for me? And you can't buy my will. I mean, I could hate you. As you whip me, I say, boy, I hate you. But what I'm talking about is not selling the will. I'm talking about selling the right to complain about assault and battery. See, if you come over to me right now with a whip and start whipping me, I'm going to call the police and say, you know, get this guy off me. He's crazy, right? But when I took that $5 million from you and gave it to my son's doctor, you're my son's doctor, I agreed to it. So I'm taking away my right to call the police against you for assault and battery. So I think that Rothbard was wrong on this. If you look at my publication record, I've criticized Murray Rothbard and Mises and Hans Hoppe and other people on many things. But that's part of the intellectual development. You don't agree with everyone on everything. And what I would do is invite people who disagree with me and agree with Murray to write an article showing why I'm wrong. and then I would write a reply, and maybe we'd get closer to the truth. I believe in John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, the benefit of debate. So to answer your question, I mean, I'm a professor, I'm never allowed to answer a question directly. But to answer your question directly, I think Murray Rothbard was wrong on this issue.
Temos mais uma pergunta do lado de cá.
Walter, recently the Obama campaign has accused Romney of that Romney, if he wins the presidency, he will end the Little Better Act of equal pay for equal work. What are your thoughts on this law that happens in the United States, and what do you think if it has any future?
The question is about equal pay for equal work. Remember I gave you that case of the black and the white who was equally productive at $10 an hour? It's the same for women. You might ask, why is it that women earn less than men? And in the US, I don't know what it is here, but in the US, for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns about 70 cents, roughly. Why? Especially when tests have been taken on men and women and they have the same IQ. Very close. Now, in the 18th century and the 19th century, men were more productive than women. Why? Because a lot of jobs took strength. The way we knocked down a tree was with a hatchet. The way we pushed things was like this. Nowadays, the way we push things around is by pressing a button or pulling a lever, and women are equally able to handle heavy machinery. They're building a new building where I live, and they dig a deep hole. Well, how do they dig a deep hole? Not with picks and shovels, but with steam shovels. So in the 18th and the 19th and the early 20th century, I would expect that the difference between male and female incomes is due to men are stronger. Nowadays, you still have this divergence, and it can't be attributed to brute strength, or maybe a little bit because some jobs require, but very few. So what do we attribute this to? Well, I attribute it to different productivity. So why is it that women have lower productivity in the market? Because of an economic insight called alternative costs. Whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of doing something else not as well. Michael Phelps is the world champion swimmer from the last Olympics. He's not a good cellist, can't play the cello at the world-class level. Why? Because he's in the pool all day, and to become a world-class cellist, you have to play the cello, and he has no time. What's his name? The guy who broke that 100-meter race in the Olympics? Usain Bolt. He broke it, he ran it like 9.5 or something crazy. He's not a world-class violinist. Why not? Because he's busy running. And in order to be a world-class violinist, you have to play all day long. Whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of not doing something else as well or at all. So what are women doing? They're taking care of babies. Let me take a survey here. If you're married, answer in the based on your own marriage. If you're not married, answer on the basis of the marriage with which you're most familiar, presumably your parents' marriage. And I'm going to ask you, how is household work divided between the husband and the wife? And by household work, I mean childcare and shopping and cooking and cleaning and waking up at 3 in the morning with the baby and stuff like that. And I'll give you 3 choices. The man does more than the woman, it's equal, or the woman does more than the man. How many say in this marriage that you're now thinking of, the man does more housework than the woman? Raise your hands. One liar over there. I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. How many say it's equal? Roughly, it doesn't have to be 50-50, it could be 45-55, roughly equal. Another dozen liars. How many say the woman does more than the man? Obviously, look at that. I mean, 98% of the marriages are like that. So it should be no mystery why women earn less than men in the market, because they're doing non-market things. And whenever you do anything, you do it at the expense of not doing this as well as you could have had you not done that. Now, as an Austrian economist, and I'll talk more about this later, tomorrow. I'm not a big believer in statistics. But sometimes statistics can't test theory, but they can illustrate it. And what I did in my own writing on that, which is in my book, some book or other, I think Discrimination or Labor Economics, what I did is I asked not for the male-female wage ratio, which is 70%, but I asked for three of them. I said, what's the total, 70%? What's the ratio for ever married? Ever married means you're married, you're widowed, you're divorced, you're separated, ever married, and then never married. Never married means nothing to do with marriage. No widowed, no divorced, no separated, no nothing. Do you know what the ratio for ever married is? Instead of 70%, it's like 45%. And do you know what the ratio is for never married? 1. Namely, never married men and women earn roughly the same amount. Look, the idea of sexism is I hate women because I'm a sexist. I hate women. They have internal plumbing that's different. They wear a dress. You know, they're horrible people. So why would I discriminate against on the basis of marriage? All women are equally no good, right? According to that theory of sexism. But so what is this idea that the never marrieds, there's no discrimination? So now I don't say that this is definitive, but this is an indication of what's going on here. The reason women earn less than men is because of marital status, mainly. 90%, or I shouldn't say a number, but mainly. There are other, there's another issue. It's called the glass ceiling. A glass ceiling is a ceiling. Women can go up to here, they can become vice president, but they can't become president. Why do we have a glass ceiling? There are very, very few women who are prime ministers or presidents. Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, a few, but very, very few. There are very, very few women who win Nobel Prizes in anything except literature, and God knows what they do in literature. I don't know how they picked that, but I think the first woman just earned a Nobel Prize in economics, and in physics, chemistry, medicine, and the Fields Medal in math, no women. Why is this? Why do we have this glass ceiling? The reason we have the glass ceiling is because you don't just look at average male and female abilities, but you look at this disparity, or the standard deviation, or the variance. Now look, if you go to a jail, I don't know which country it is, you go to a jail, who do you see, men or women? Men. You go to a mental institution, who do you see? Men. You go to the grave, now there'll be an equal number of people in the grave, men and women, but you look in the grave markings for the year, and you look who died before their time. Their time, say, is 70 years or 65 or something like that. Who died at age 30 or 20? Men or women? Men. So they're in jail, they're in mental institutions, they're in the grave. Men are a problem. Very few women there. Well, look, if you're going to have a normal curve, and you have men at the left, I'm doing it for you, the left side of the bell curve, well, then you have to have men on the right side of the bell curve, otherwise you're not going to have a normal curve. So you ask, how many chess grandmasters are women? 1. It used to be before the Polgar sisters in Hungary. There was one woman and she was rated 400th out of 500 grandmasters. The Polgar sisters were amazing. The worst one was 400th, the middle one was 200th, and the best one was Judith Polgar was rated 15th or something. That's it. The rest, all men. Nobel Prize winners, all men. Because not only are men and women equally on average, but men are God's crapshoot. Women are God's insurance policy. Women are all in the middle. There are very, very few women in mental institutions or in jail or in the graveyard. And there are very few women out on this side, namely Nobel Prize winners. So that's why we have a glass ceiling. It's got nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism is blamed for everything. Bad breath, whatever. Slavery, it's capitalism's fault. But this is not capitalism's fault. The reason we have the glass ceiling is because men and women are different. I hate to tell it to you people, but there's a difference. Thank God for the difference.
Temos mais uma pergunta ali no finalzinho. De André.
Most people tend to criticize the act of gouging prices. How would an Austrian economist address on this issue?
Price gouging?
Yeah.
Well, this is really an Austrian question, but since you ask, one of the things I will be doing tomorrow is talking about that, namely the market failure of monopoly. You know, it's interesting, when Katrina occurred in New Orleans, what happened was that the price of gasoline, the price of baby diapers, the price of orange juice, the price of water, the price of candles, the price of flashlight batteries, all rose very, very high. Why? Because the demand was there and the supply was knocked out. This price gouging has two beneficial effects. First of all, picture 300 people lined up in Walmart to get this stuff. At the old prices, they're going to grab 20 gallons of water at an old price of, say, $1 per gallon. But if the price of water is now $20 a gallon, people aren't going to grab it all. They're going to leave some for people in the back of the line. Do you see the point? If you go and buy baby diapers, you're not going to buy them all, even though you might need them. You're going to leave some for other people. So one of the benefits of price gouging or high prices is we can allocate it in a socially just way. Pardon me for using curse words here. We can be more egalitarian. We can share, which is a benefit, because you don't want people to grab up all the orange juice and these people have no orange juice. And the only way you can do that is if the price of orange juice rises. The second benefit of high prices is, look, there are only two motivations for people to come down to New Orleans after the Katrina. One is benevolence, and the other is profit-seeking, selfishness. And when the people in New Orleans needed all the help they can get, we should mobilize all of human characteristics, not just benevolence. Benevolence only goes so far. So if the price of water is $20 a gallon, people from Kentucky or Michigan or Mexico will come to New Orleans with water, which will push down the price of water until there's some sort of equilibration. So I don't believe in that price gouging is bad. And I think that the word gouging is problematic. Just price rises. And price rises have two beneficial effects. One, sharing what we now have more equally, and two, bringing in more supplies. Governor Blanco, the governor of Louisiana, said these are price gouges, we've got to throw them in jail. Well, then the market can't work. The market is benevolent. The market was working to bring new supplies in and to share them more equally. There was this story told by Mike Munger, a friend of mine, a political scientist at Duke. And what he said is there was this line, 30, 50 people waiting on line to buy ice. And they were selling ice for $20 a gallon. I'm making up the numbers, but a very high price. And somebody online had a cell phone. Maybe we should ban cell phones? No, I'm just kidding. And he called the cops. And the cops came along and shut down the operation and seized the ice and let it melt. And all the people online applauded the cops. Hans Hoppe says contradictions don't exist in nature. This was a contradiction. People are waiting in the line to get the stuff and they're calling the cops to stop it. How can this be? The reason is sociobiology. What is sociobiology? Sociobiology is the theory that we are the way we are, we act the way we now act based on what it took to live 1 million years ago when we were in trees or in the caves. How many people here are afraid of snakes? Raise your hand. How many people are afraid of bathtubs? What, bathtubs? Who's afraid of bathtubs? Do you know that bathtubs kill more people now than snakes? Milton Friedman died of a bathtub. He slipped in the bathtub, he hit his head, and on the way to the hospital he died. Bathtubs kill. Snakes, no. And you people who didn't raise your hands are all a bunch of liars. If there was a snake running around here, you'd all be, scared. Well, why is this? It's because, why do we now fear snakes that are not that harmful, and bathtubs we don't fear and they're very harmful? Why? Sociobiology. Because 1 million years ago, if you were afraid of a snake, you were more likely to give your genes to the next generation than if you go over to the snake and pat it. Oh, nice snakey. You didn't live. Whereas if you were afraid of bathtubs 1 million years ago, it didn't give you any advantage. There were no such things as bathtubs. We are hardwired to be against capitalism. Because 1 million years ago, we didn't live based on capitalism. We lived based on sharing. If in our little tribe of 50 people in the tree or in the cave, I was sick this week and you helped me, and next week you're sick and I help you, our tribe will live more than if I'm sick this week and you say, the hell with you. Well, next week I'm not around to help you. So that tribe dies, our tribe lives, because we have benevolence. If there was a baby right here crying, we would stop and help the baby, because we can't stand babies crying, and we're motivated to help them. If there was another tribe of human-like creatures that didn't care about babies, they wouldn't exist. So the reason, you know the rock of Sisyphus in Greek legend, you push the rock up the hill and it keeps coming down, you keep pushing it up, keeps coming down. Why is it that libertarianism and Austrian economics, but I'll talk more about that tomorrow, why is it that it's such a hard sell? Why are there so few here? Why don't we have a Ron Paul as president, or a Brazilian Ron Paul as president instead of the president you have? Because we're hardwired not to accept free enterprise. We're hardwired to accept socialism. You go to any university. Every time I get a new bunch of freshmen, they're all a bunch of commies. Because their guts tell them communism. And I have to use Henry Hazlitt and Murray Rothbard to try to wean them away from it. Why? Because of biology. Now, does this mean that we should give up? No. We shouldn't give up, because it's so much fun to take noses and tweak them, pompous noses. It's so much fun to promote liberty that whether we succeed or not, it doesn't matter to me. If we're going to succeed, I'm going to keep writing and speaking, and so are you. If we fail, we'll do the same thing. It matters not whether the case for optimism or the case for pessimism is stronger. We're still going to try to promote liberty because we're aberrations, biologically. We few people who are into free enterprise. So I hope that you'll excuse my very long-winded explanation for the price gouging question.
Professor, now you will need your translator. We have a last question in Portuguese, as she told me. Let's find quem é. Logo
Oi.
Are you ready? Just a second. Só minutinho para ele.
Yeah. Go.
Ok?
Referente ao que o Tucker disse, você falou da questão de ser subjetivo em relação a gente não poder dizer, no caso da propriedade intelectual, se realmente seria bom, se seria ruim. Aí, depois você, quando falou do caso dos ônibus, inclusive, de que não era permitido para negros e tal, que o mercado poderia dar essa solução. Ou necessariamente daria essa solução. Eu queria perguntar se isso não seria uma questão tão subjetiva quanto essa, de que não necessariamente o mercado vai dar essa solução se não tivesse tido leis proibindo e tal. Porque também seria subjetivo do mesmo jeito, não? É minha pergunta aí, minha dúvida.
I don't know that I fully understood, but let me try. The way I understand the question, it's a two-part question, and this young man has the audacity to accuse me of contradicting myself. Rotten kid, kick him out. I'm just kidding. We're not Randians here. We don't do that. He says, on the one hand, I'm a subjectivist when it comes to intellectual property. On the other hand, when it comes to the blacks in the back of the bus, I'm not a subjectivist. Is that accurate? Well, whether it is or not, that's the only thing I understand, so I'll try to answer that. As an Austrian, I'm a subjectivist in the sense that I think that I like this jacket more than the $100 it cost, and you might not, so we each are subjective, we each have subjective tastes in that regard. But I don't see what this has to do with intellectual property or the bus. Intellectual property, the main issue, well, there are two issues. One is the libertarian issue, and the other is the issue of, if we have intellectual property rights, will we increase GDP or not? Will we increase innovation or not? And I don't think I'm taking a subjectivist view. I'm taking an objectivist view on libertarianism, and I'm saying that as far as libertarianism is concerned, intellectual property is nonsense for reasons that Jeff Tucker very eloquently mentioned. If it's scarce, then we could have property rights disputes over it. But if it's not scarce, like ideas, once ideas are out there, E equals MC squared. The Pythagorean theorem, those ideas are out there, and if I use them, I don't detract from your use of them. We can both use them, so it's silly to say only I can use them and you can't use them. So on the other issue, the issue of the blacks in the back of the bus, what I said was, the reason the blacks had to be confined to the back of the bus was because of Jim Crow laws, which were very unjust libertarian-wise. And then I mentioned an economic point. The economic point would be that in a free society, in a free market, their peril would not be as dangerous. The market would come to their rescue. Other owners, other people would set up another bus company and treat black people nicely, because they would make profits in doing that. And I gave cases that if you paid blacks less than their productivity, you could make more profit by hiring them and knock out your competitors. So I don't see myself as contradicting myself, although I'm always open to that. If I am, I have to change one view or the other. And I don't see that subjectivism really comes into play in either of these cases. So I hope I've adequately answered your question.
Vamos então aplaudir aqui o Professor Bloch. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.